Full session. Alex Narvey here is from Winnipeg, Canada, and runs his company Precursor and holds the title of Chief Plate Spinner. I read that online just this morning, and
okay.
I'll leave it to him to explain what that means. But please, everyone, give him a warm welcome, Alex Narvey.
Okay, so he already introduced me. I'm going to show you how I used FileMaker to try and make my MSP life a little easier. Or maybe I'm just making some Rube Goldberg machines for tasks that I could do easier some other way. Once you've seen the whole presentation, you can decide. The slides will be available from precursor.ca/slides. So let me introduce myself. I started Precursor Systems in 1994 in Winnipeg. And in 1994, my business plan was to sell only annual support plans, no hourly services. That's why Alan Hancock calls me the original Mac MSP. Why have you never heard of this fascinating story? Is it due to my modesty, or is it because I live in Winnipeg? So if you don't know where Winnipeg is, let's have Maxwell Smart show you.
You see, the position of all these chaos agents can be explained, all except one.
Which one is that?
Now, what's this guy doing up here in Manitoba?
So
He was holding the map up.
if that cultural reference is too 20th century for you, please refer to The Simpsons. If you don't, okay.
You see, the position of all...
Here we go. So this year I celebrated Precursor's 25th anniversary with a party at a local dance hall. I hired a band, and there was food and beer on tap, and it was a ton of fun. I highly recommend it. Invitations were a deck of 25 commemorative cards, and if you'd like a pack, see me later. I have a few left over to bring to the conference. Inspired by Michael Thompson of Origin 84, I gave out Customer Appreciation Awards for clients who have been with me for 5, 10, and 15 plus years. But enough about me. I'm here to talk about FileMaker. What is FileMaker, you might ask? Or you might even ask, who is FileMaker? Well, FileMaker seems to have a hard time figuring out that themselves. They recently reinvented themselves as, and I do mean reinvented, as Claris FileMaker. And the FileMaker app is no longer an app, but a platform. Specifically, it's a workplace innovation platform. I started using it 20 years ago to do things like invoicing and trouble ticketing, but I've come to realize it can do much more for me. FileMaker can interact with things outside of FileMaker and not just databases and spreadsheets. It has two very handy script steps that we will look at today. FileMaker can perform Apple scripts. This was introduced back in version 6. It doesn't work from FileMaker Server or FileMaker Go or the new FileMaker API, so it may not have legs, but it's still very useful locally with FileMaker Pro. And Apple scripts can do shell script. So that means that FileMaker Pro Advanced can run most shell scripts. And I know that Apple's deprecating Bash, but for the time being, we can still make some hay with all our old scripts. Here's a simple shell script to say hello in FileMaker. But if you do something fancy, you might encounter this error message. And even this one. Since version 16, FileMaker has blocked the AppleScript API by default. If you want it back, you have to enable the FMEXT script access extended privilege for the relevant privilege set or sets. And this is where you enable that privilege. In Mojave, we also have to allow automation in transparency, consent, and control, or PPPCP. And in Catalina, we also have to allow files and folders access. Now, since version 12, FileMaker has an insert from URL command. And you can see that it's much more widely supported than the AppleScript ability. And it works not only from FileMaker Server, but also in FileMaker Go, and even with the new FileMaker API. Here's an insert from URL script step in FileMaker. In version 16, the insert from URL script step began to support curl commands. That means it can interact with websites that have REST APIs. REST stands for representational state transfers, and it can get you information in a JSON or JavaScript object notation file. REST is CRUD. So when people ask you what this presentation was like, you can say, it was CRUD. So POST can create new resources, GET can request info, PUT can update an existing resource, and delete can delete a resource. Today we're mostly working with POST and GET commands. Here's a sample POST command that you could send to a REST API. And if the POST is successful, it will return the following info in a JSON file. Getting started with curl options has a fairly high learning curve, but there's an excellent document in the FileMaker community that provides a lot of examples of what you can do. Some of the ones we're going to use today are -H for headers, -F for form items, -b for cookies, and -d for data, which will include both variables and JSON keys. You can test POST and GET commands and see what the resulting JSON would be using the Cocoa REST client. And an even more powerful environment for working with REST is Postman. It was mentioned by Charles Edge yesterday. Once you have some JSON, you need to get the JSON keys and values into FileMaker fields to be useful. The way you do that is to parse it with FileMaker's JSON functions. And FileMaker has a variety of good calls for this, and we'll look at that in more detail a little later. Here are some resources for parsing JSON files into FileMaker. Now, I'm conscious of there being some great coders and programmers in this room. I see Phil's over there, and he knows everything about FileMaker there is to know. So before we continue, I'd like to caution you that what you're about to see is some pretty ugly code and some things that may look more like Rube Goldberg machines than efficiency applications. There's probably not a slide from here on in that someone in this room won't be able to say, there's an easier way to do that, you know, or you don't have to do that. All I ask is that you save those comments until the end of the presentation and don't burst my bubble, or I'll never get through this. Now let's take a look at a few examples of the kinds of things I've been doing with these script steps in FileMaker. File Sharing Assistant is a project I dreamed up in 2017 to help me with macOS Server. Now, I'm not endorsing macOS Server, nor am I bemoaning its deprecation. It is what it is, or I guess it was what it was. In High Sierra, Apple moved file sharing out of the macOS Server GUI and into the operating system proper. There was some useful management functionality in macOS Server GUI in Sierra, and I used it fairly frequently to sort out problems. You could see connected users, and you could disconnect them with the click of a button. But now in High Sierra, this is all gone. So I dreamed up this little FileMaker project to get that functionality back. Although the functionality was gone from the GUI, I discovered it still appeared in macOS Server Web Admin. You may not remember this, but before macOS 10.9, the Server Web Admin was on by default. Charles Edge wrote a nice article about how to use it on Cryptid. To use it in High Sierra, you first need to enable it with this command. And then you can see all of this stuff. In the Samba Manager section, you can get a list of connected users. And that returns a lengthy plist. It's not exactly GUI-rific. To disconnect someone, you have to find their session ID. And then you plug the session ID into the disconnect command. So while it's theoretically possible to use this, it's hardly a one-click of the mouse type thing like the macOS Server GUI. So I explored the command line to see if it would yield any more practical method. You can list Samba users with this command. And that's easy to do using a perform AppleScript step in FileMaker. Here's the do shell script command in FileMaker. But again, to disconnect someone, you need to manually plug in their session ID, and then to top it off, you have to respond by typing Control-D from the keyboard. And I could not figure out how to get that Control-D to happen. I've since learned about the expect command, but in 2017, I didn't have that in my toolkit. So I captured the web URL that resulted when I clicked the send command button in the disconnect users window, and I deconstructed it, and I translated it into a FileMaker curl command. And after much experimentation, I came up with this lovely perform AppleScript that curls the disconnect URL for me. Looking at it today, I can't believe I made it. I don't even understand how it works, but it works. So a quick little demo. In this demo movie, you see File Sharing Assistant reporting on a few connected users on our super secret, top secret server. And we determined that we want to disconnect one troublesome user named dtrump. And we click the disconnect button, and then after a slight delay, the view is going to refresh. And did we get through it there? Good. So much for my File Sharing Assistant. I noticed that when I was doing the demo movie, it was a little bit buggy in 10.13.6. I built the thing in 10.13.0, but I'm not going to fix it because I know nobody uses Mac OS Server to share files in High Sierra. The next tool I'm going to talk about is Expiration Manager. It's a tool I built to help me with Watchman Monitoring. One of my favorite things about Watchman is it automatically notifies you about expirations for various software subscriptions. You don't have to do anything. The Watchman agent discovers the expiration dates, and it just emails you notifications. And Watchman can also do this for things like domain registrations and SSL certificates. But for domains and certificates, you have to enter all the information manually, like an animal. And you can't even select the manufacturer without having added it first on a separate pane. And that's just a pain. So I decided to try to automate the process. Step 1 is to acquire the expiration info online, and step 2 is to populate the info into Watchman. So let's start with part 1, getting the expiration info. Fortunately, there's command line tools available to do this. For example, if we do a whois command on the domain mactech.com, we get all of this stuff. And if we pipe the output to various grep and awk routines, we can suss out things like the registrar's name and the expiry date. And here's what we get if we do an open SSL command on the certificate for www.mactech.com. And again, if we pipe the output through various grep and cut commands, we can suss out the name of the certificate's issuer and the expiry date. Now, to automate these shell scripts, we use the perform AppleScript do shell script command, and we have FileMaker enter the results into a database field. All we need to do is import a list of domain names and certificate host names into FileMaker and have it run the scripts for us. Here's an example spreadsheet. For the purposes of this exercise, I was unofficially the MSP for Mac DevOps YVR, and I created a group in my Watchman dashboard called MDO YVR. I tracked the new domain, mdoyvr.com, and the old one, too, macdevops.ca, and the security certificates for both websites. Here's a look at the FileMaker expiration details layout I made. We click the button to run the import script, and FileMaker now has some records with Watchman group name and fully qualified domain name that we want the expiration info for. We get FileMaker to loop through these records, perform the scripts, and put the info it collects into the appropriate fields of our records. Here's an example of the script to get the info for a domain name. We click the button to start the script, it loops through the records, and voila, we have the expiration info. All we have to do now is push that info up to the Watchman Monitoring dashboard. But how can we do that? Watchman Monitoring has a REST API to interact with, and it has excellent documentation with plenty of detailed examples. According to Watchman, we have to make a post command that looks something like this. And if our post is successful, it will populate Watchman with the info and return the following JSON to us. To test this out in practice, I used the Cocoa REST client. I just plugged the appropriate values into the URL line at the top and clicked the submit button. And sure enough, I got a valid JSON file returned with all the correct details in it. So REST can talk to Watchman Monitoring, and FileMaker has an insert from URL command that can curl a post and then enter the resulting JSON into FileMaker fields. So here's the example of a REST post command from the Watchman documentation. And here's what it looks like in the Insert from URL command within FileMaker. Here's a look at all the records that got created in Watchman and recorded to FileMaker when we clicked that button. So a quick demo. This demo is pre-recorded, but it hasn't been sped up. It takes place in actual time. You can see a Watchman dashboard with some computer expirations in it. In this particular web view, the domain and certificate expirations would appear at the top if there were any, but because it's manual, I haven't entered them yet. So let's start the video and make some. First, we import the records from our spreadsheet, and now we get the expiration info. Okay, import done. We're getting the info. The first two are domains and will appear on the right, and the second two are certificates and will appear on the left. In the real world, when I used this on my actual Watchman dashboard, it took about 3.5 minutes to collect the info for 65 domains and certs, and about 3 seconds to push it up to Watchman. So we're almost ready to send it to Watchman. And here's the view. I'll refresh the page, and there's our new certificates expirations. So that was Expiration Manager. Next I'd like to show you is Dark Web Scanner. I made the Dark Web Scanner to automatically generate some nicely branded reports for clients, instead of paying for a heavy-duty commercial service to do it for me. Commercial dark web scans seem expensive, and things like unconfirmed breaches and unrecognizable hashed-up passwords can be confusing and difficult to explain to clients. On the other hand, Have I Been Pwned is free. It deals only with confirmed breaches, and it's easy to understand and hence easy to explain to clients. And it seems to have the same effect as a heavy-duty commercial scan does in getting them to buy into improved password security. Will O'Neill pointed out to me that you can already get Have I Been Pwned to generate a report on an entire domain. But you need to show proof of domain ownership to get the HTML, the Excel, or the JSON file. And you still need to format that file into something branded to your local identity. So why not have FileMaker do all this for you automatically? Have I Been Pwned has an API that will let FileMaker talk to it. And FileMaker can make excellent summary reports with WYSIWYG editing that you can conform to your brand's design guidelines. Here's a sample report that I generated showing a clear total users and a clear total breaches on the left-hand side, and also summarizing each individual's breaches on the right-hand side of the page. The details are nicely formatted on successive pages of the PDF. This particular report was about 18 pages long. So let's watch a brief demo movie of this in action. First, I'm going to import a domain's email addresses. For this demo, I've chosen MacTech.com email addresses. I hope Neil doesn't mind. After the addresses are imported, we click the button to get the pwned information. In version 3 of the API, there's a rate limit, so I had to impose a slight delay of a few seconds between each record query. Once we get all the pwned info, it's easy to build pwned formatted listings and parse the JSON into fields. And then with one click, FileMaker builds the summary and we see the total breaches. There's our PDF, and there's our total breaches for MacTech. And if we scroll over to the right, you can see that Neil's address has the most breaches. So if Neil's here, you might want to sit down with one of the excellent Apple consultants in LA like Ty Romstadt and review your password policies. So now let's take a look at the latest project I'm working on, Monthly Reporter. Monthly Reporter is something that can automate the building and delivery of nicely formatted PDF reports on a per-client basis with info gleaned from multiple sources like Watchman Monitoring, Monkey Report, Zendesk, and others. I got motivated to make Monthly Reporter because I have a custom dashboard in Monkey Report which gives a nice executive summary with easy-to-read graphics to show my clients. But when you print out the custom report web page, something terrible happens. The browser takes over and screws up the formatting, creating an ugly multi-page document. And I don't want to email them something this ugly. The whole point was to have it all appear on one page. So every month, I take a screenshot of each client's custom dashboard, I manually rename the file with their company name, I attach it to an email message, and I send it out like an animal. Wouldn't it be nice if FileMaker could get all the info, format the report, make a PDF, email it for me, and have FileMaker Server schedule that to happen on the last day of each month? It sounded doable. And I've already had some success with REST services by using Watchman's well-documented API to get SSL expirations set up automatically. So I decided to start with Watchman and its API. I'd like to get the number of warnings currently active on a Watchman group for my executive summary. In Watchman, you can generate reports with details about warnings quite easily. Here's an example of the Watchman report that gets generated. These reports are detailed and well-spaced, and they can take many pages, but I just want a quick executive summary for the monthly reporter. To get it by means of the API, we first need an API key to use. And from my reading of the Watchman API docs, we'll first need to get a list of our Watchman groups so that we can query to the correct group. Then we'll ask to see all the computers for that group, with each computer expanded to show all its plugins, and we can check the status of each plugin to see if it's showing a warning. So we'll need the list of groups to return both the group's name and its user ID, or UID. And because we'll need that group UID when we query each group's plugins for their status. Here's the script I wrote to parse out the group data into its proper field names. We really only need the group name and group UID, though. And here's the query that we post in the curl options. I'm not the world's greatest JSON parser, so I used a FileMaker calculation to add a header called plugins to the return JSON to make it easier for me to parse. Now that we have the results in the plugins JSON, we run a script that parses for the number of warnings. The script gets the number of computers in a variable called $ComputerCount so that we can go through each computer's plugin results looking for the key status equals warning. And then we increment a variable called $warnings, which we will use to populate the field warnings. Here's what the whole thing looks like in my FileMaker layout. You can see the group name and the group UID, and you can see the JSON that was returned with my header plugins, and you can see the warnings field where we parsed out the count of status equals warning and got the number 2. So that was relatively easy. So I know that Watchman can integrate with Zendesk, and Zendesk also has a very rich and well-documented API. So we'll try working with Zendesk next. Zendesk has an online report, and it can show you the number of closed tickets, but it doesn't seem to do that by organization. It gives you the total for all your organizations, and I would like my client's executive summary to show how many tickets were closed in the last month for their organization alone. According to the Zendesk API docs, it looks like a properly constructed search query can get exactly what I want, and as a bonus, without all the manipulations I had to do with the Watchman plugin status. To do the search using the API, you first need to get an API key to authenticate with. The search query we need will look like the top line, and the bottom line represents a FileMaker version where we're going to pull some of the info we need from FileMaker fields and from variables. In FileMaker, a single $sign indicates a variable that is local to the script, and a double $sign indicates a global variable that runs across multiple scripts. Here's what it looks like when constructing it in FileMaker. The insert from URL command will get the subdomain from a field in the settings layout, and the ticket organization is going to have to come from the list of organizations in Zendesk, so we'll need to query Zendesk for that first. The time period will be a FileMaker global variable that will use a FileMaker calculation to give us a date, the correct number of days back, and FileMaker is going to have to format that date in the syntax that Zendesk requires, which is year-month-day. The curl options are going to do the authentication to the Zendesk. And so the FileMaker database has a settings layout with fields called username and API key where we can pull those two values from. FileMaker's default date format and the Zendesk API date format are different. So the Zendesk period variable is formatted using a custom FileMaker function from Brian Dunning's custom function library called date.format that was provided by the Tim Anderson Group. I get the number of days from a FileMaker field called period that is a pop-up menu with a value list with numbers like 10, 30, 60, 90 days, etc. Here's the FileMaker script that gets the organizations list in a JSON and parses the JSON into FileMaker fields. I'm pulling all the possible info from organizations like name, ID, description, notes, etc. But I really only need the organization's name for this to work. Once we have a database full of closed tickets, we just need to count the JSON element. Here's the simplified control panel. And this is what the result page looks like. The tally in the total closed field with the number 4 in it is a global field and represents the total closed tickets for the last 30 days for the fictitious MacTech organization I created in Zendesk and populated with a few of my computers and tickets. So now that we've done Watchman and Zendesk, it's time to get back to Monkey Report. An automated way to email out nicely formatted Monkey Report data is what got me started on this whole tilting at windmills quest in the first place. Here's the actual custom dashboard I created in Monkey Report that I'm currently manually doing a screen cap of and emailing out each month to each client like an animal. For this presentation, I focused on just getting the information displayed by the DetectX widget. I want to show the client how many computers are clean and how many have issues. DetectX is a great anti-malware utility from Phil Stokes. There's an affordable management license so you can deploy it via Monkey, and there's a great Monkey Report widget too. Monkey Report does have an API, and Monkey Report's author, Arjen van Bochoven, gave an example of a shell script to query it. In the example, Arjen queries the database for a number of items, including serial number, host name, description, etc. The items that I want are called detectx.status and detectx.number-of-issues. I could do something like using the perform AppleScript step to do Arjen's shell script from within FileMaker, but that's not very flexible, and commenting out certain characters from long scripts in native AppleScript can be very complicated indeed. And also, AppleScript cannot be run from FileMaker server on a schedule. So I'd much rather use the insert from URL command with a curl that we've been working with in Watchman and Zendesk. By opening the PHP of the DetectX widget, you can see that it reveals exactly what we're looking for to plug into Arjen's example. Here's the URL that you need to get the DetectX stats. We'll show the two columns, status and number of issues, and we'll focus on 3 types of status: clean, issues, and infected. So setting up the curl is the easy part. It turns out that authenticating to Monkey Report is the hard part. In Zendesk and in Watchman, we send an API key in the curl options to authenticate. But Monkey Report has no API keys. It uses a 2-step procedure where you first send the username and password to get a cookie, and then you use that cookie for the rest of the session. Fortunately, FileMaker DevCon wizard Steve Winter provided an excellent write-up of how to do just that. First, filling in a cookie jar variable and then using the cookie string in subsequent requests. So I adapted that into my FileMaker solution, and after about 100 tries, I had to admit that it was just not working. There was something different about the way Monkey Report API does the authentication compared to the way Steve Winter's API did it. After much searching, I found John Crane's Monkey Report Postman collection, which sends the authentication info into Monkey Report successfully. Unlike Steve Winter's API, which was taking the username and password in the header of the URL, John Crane's Postman was sending the authentication info in the body. Eureka! After much trial and error, getting the syntax of the curl options just right, I succeeded with this. And now that I had a cookie string, I could query the DetectX status for the number of issues. To get the stats for only one client, you need to be using the business units feature of Monkey Report. By logging in using the credentials of a member from the business unit, you can see only the appropriate info for that client. Here's a look at the layout I made that shows the JSON result and the DetectX stats buttons. To get our button totals, all we need to do is parse the JSON list values for the 3 status words, clean, issues, and infected. So now we have FileMaker gleaning some info via the APIs of Monkey Report, Watchman, and Zendesk. Here's the FileMaker layout I made to gather all the data. And here's the layout that will format the PDF, which we'll mail out in the demo. FileMaker has had the ability to create PDFs and email them out for many years, so I won't go into detail about that. So far, all of my API efforts went into gathering information. But wouldn't it be nice if we could use an API to send out some information? Perhaps FileMaker could post a notification to Slack, or maybe even send the PDF with it. Slack has an overabundance of APIs and a labyrinth of documentation to go with them. In the web API alone, there are at least 2 methods of posting that we could try. The first one is called chat.postMessage. The message can be posted via JSON in an HTTP post using chat.postMessage calls. The 3 things that are required are an authentication token, the channel ID that we're posting to, and of course the text of the message itself. Slack even gives us a nice example of what the curl command should look like. The hardest part is getting the bearer token with the appropriate scopes. To get the bearer token, we first need to create a Slack API app. In our new Slack app, we can set up things like incoming webhooks and permissions. The incoming webhook allows the app itself to post to the channel. Your app could have a different name from your own Slack username, so you could, in theory, post from either user Johnny Appleseed or the app Johnny App. Setting up the incoming webhook will generate a slew of authentication materials in Slack, including an app ID, a client secret, a signing secret, and a verification token. And of course, none of these is the thing that you need to authenticate your post using curl from FileMaker. We need something called an OAuth bearer token, and we get to this screen using the permissions button instead of the webhooks button. And while we're in the permissions area, we need to set up scopes for posting a message. We should enable send messages as user and post to specific channels in Slack. Here's a look at the curl example that Slack provided and what it looks like when it appears in a FileMaker calculation window. The OAuth bearer token gets delivered in the header with a -H. And the channel and message text come from an @$data variable that holds the info in the JSON keys. For example, here it pulls these from FileMaker variables I made called $channel and $comment. Here's a look at the FileMaker layout that posted the message. And on the right, you can see the message as it appears in Slack. In my testing, it worked quite nicely. But I wanted to post the PDF file I'm generating for the demo into the Slack message itself. And to do that, we need to use an API call named files.upload. And of course, it turns out that using files.upload method is nothing like using chat.postMessage. Totally different. For one thing, we get this warning from Slack. So even though we have the JSON delivery all worked out, we can't use that method in our post. We have to use www-form-URL encoded. That's not so bad, because normally we just use some -F commands, and in fact it might be easier than sending JSON keys. In my testing with Cocoa REST client, this curl command worked perfectly, so we just need to translate it into FileMaker curl options. The important thing to note is that the $filePath variable in FileMaker can't pull a PDF file from a path to the hard drive. The PDF has to be already in a FileMaker container field, and the $filePath variable will have to take it from there. So our PDF generation script is going to pop a copy of the PDF into that container field in case we want to pump it up to Slack. Here's a look at the FileMaker layout that posted the file. You can see that there is a PDF in a container field ready to be posted. And on the right is what the file upload looks like in an actual Slack channel. So that's how to use FileMaker to post to Slack. And now we're ready for a demo. Now, I've run this demo about 50 times, and it works every single time, including in this hotel on the hotel Wi-Fi. However, when I run it at this podium, it interrupts the video feed, so I can't drop out of my slideshow to do it. So I'm going to run a pre-recorded movie of the demo. If you want to see the live demo in the hall, just ask me and I'll flip my computer open for you. So here's my FileMaker stack. And for those of you who haven't seen FileMaker before, you can see that I've got database tables for each of my layouts, and I've got a bunch of fields in each of those tables. And I've also made a bunch of layouts for Monkey Report and for Watchman, etc. And those layouts use a bunch of scripts that I've got in the script table here. So again, I've got scripts for Monkey Report and Watchman and Zendesk, etc. And here's what one of the layouts looks like. We're going to take a look at the TechDeck status. You can see the buttons are filled. I'm going to click the button to delete that stuff. It's all gone. I click the button that acquires it from the API. That's basically how it works. But now we're going to go back to the beginning. Well, here's another, that's what Zendesk looks like. Same type of thing for each of the modules. And I'm going to clear out the information from all of these things with my cute little status bar there. And then, because I'm just showing you that everything's gotten cleared out there, I'm going to open up my email client to an email address that I seldom use and a Slack channel that I created for testing. So there's nothing in them right now, but they're going to get populated when we run the demo. So I'm going to click the button. It's getting the Monkey Report data right now. That doesn't take very long. The Watchman stuff takes a little longer because it's expanding all the computers to get all their plugin status. And then it's going to do the Zendesk stuff. And once it gets the Zendesk information, it's going to create a PDF and import that into a container field in FileMaker. And then it's going to email that out and post it to Slack. So here it is creating, and the email has already come through, and there's the Slack message. I'm going to open up the email, and there's going to be a PDF in it. I'm opening up the PDF in preview here, and you can see the PDF is already appearing on the other side in the Slack. There's your PDF with the information. So that would have been really cool if I did it live, but I hope you liked the demo. You could also do other services like Repair Shopper, but I didn't have time to get that ready for today. If you'd like to test these out for yourself, the components of Monthly Reporter will be available from the slides download link. Those are 4 clunky projects to show you some of the practical power of FileMaker. I didn't talk much about triggers and webhooks, but you can use them to get web services to automatically talk back to your FileMaker solution. I'm using some Zendesk triggers right now to update my custom work reports database. But a full treatment of triggers is beyond the scope of my presentation today. For now, we learned how to get FileMaker to glean info from some web services using REST APIs in what is hopefully a useful way for consultants and IT managers. There's a lot of online services that have a REST API. In fact, it's harder to find an online service that does not have one. So FileMaker might be a useful tool to integrate your various web services. FileMaker is available as a 45-day free demo. It's also free if you're a paid member of the Apple Consultants Network or a FileMaker partner. And if you go to FileMaker DevCon or what is going to be called Claris Engage in 2020, a copy is usually included in your ticket. But Claris is no longer a one-app company selling FileMaker. In fact, it was buying Stamplay to make the new Connect product that prompted FileMaker to rebrand as Claris again. Claris Connect will be a new product that is being described as an integration orchestration platform that will help stitch together APIs from hundreds of web services. Claris Connect is scheduled to be introduced in Q1 2020, and you can find out more in this FileMaker Tech article. Until then, you're stuck with my clunky FileMaker attempts. So thanks for listening, and I hope you find this useful.